Yes, and he will be spotlighted so nobody can be seen. And thank you everyone for coming. Ghassan, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you, Rita. Hello, everyone. I'm extremely happy to do this session with all of you. And I want to thank Rita first for organizing this event to the benefit of relief work in Lebanon. Thank you, Rita. Thank you for whatever you're doing and for the very wide array of people that you have invited for this Breathe for Beirut. I think it's a great initiative, and I thank you for that. And I must thank you again for having invited me because you're reviving an interest and the work that I had started, believe it or not, in 1995. I'm sorry, in 1985. So you're bringing back a lot of memories because I had started teaching my first seminar on negotiations in 1985 after learning, being a student with Professor Roger Fisher at the Harvard Law School, who is a master in the field of negotiations. And I kept on teaching that subject matter, that is negotiation, also mediation, for several decades. I only stopped about 10 years ago because my political obligations took me away from the things that I love to do, that was essentially also teaching. What I would also like to start telling you all is that may come as a surprise for a few, but the field of the learning and the teaching of negotiation has evolved over those decades I'm talking about. Roger Fisher was a pioneer. He started his first book, that is this one that I told you about, Getting to Yes. He started it when I was in Cambridge and back in 1982. He had published it only 2 years ago and started this course, I was one of his first students. But ever since, the field has evolved, not only in the areas of law, but in many areas, extremely broad, including psychology, sociology, business. These are the main areas where negotiation has been taught. But in every perspective, you see that negotiation has been taught, and with different tools and with different people that have tried to teach it and tried to write about it. So from every type of field, including this book is in law, in every language. You've got books in French, books in Arabic. This is a two-volume book that we have published because back in 1987, following the course that I've started and the course that I've taught at AUB, we have initiated an organization called the Lebanese Conflict Resolution Network, which had published a few books. The Lebanese Conflict Resolution Network included a number of the first students of negotiations, many of whom have become trainers themselves, and the field has broadened. We've got this book about negotiating peace, which is negotiation in the international arena, and then legal negotiations, and a whole series of books about arguments and negotiations. We got dozens, and this is only part of the library that I personally have. But if you look on Google, you'll find hundreds of books. Now, the trick, as people that are being introduced to the field, to the art and science of negotiation, as I've termed it for this seminar, you need to make a good pick. And this is why I'd very strongly recommend that you start with Getting to Yes, which is has originated, technically, one of the originators of the field back in the early 80s. But many other books are to be sold, to be read. Many are bad. And I remember in my seminars, one of the things that I used to do, and that was a 40 session seminar of 3 hours each. So, and now I'm trying to squeeze those 120 hours into less than an hour for the benefit of our meeting. But this is to tell you that's an extremely rich, extremely interesting, but also rewarding field of knowledge and expertise, you need to know that these skills can be learned and can be taught. Everybody does negotiations, like Monsieur Jourdain, who used to write prose without knowing, or speak prose without him knowing that. We all negotiate every day, every time, and several times a day. We negotiate with our spouses, with our friends. With our spouses, we negotiate a lot. We negotiate with our friends, we negotiate with our family, with our parents, with our teachers, with the authorities, with the police, you name it. Because negotiation is in close relationship with conflicts, and conflicts are in everywhere, in various degrees and various levels of conflict. But it also can be in very benign situations, such as agreeing with one's friend and one's spouse of which movie to watch on the television, or where to go, or where to have dinner. One can negotiate, and these can be hard negotiations. If the husband wants to watch an action movie and the wife wants to watch a love movie that should end well, then you could have an element of conflict. Of course, there's nothing wrong with it. But bear with me if those two lads were to agree all the time and having one of the parties win all the time, how do you think the other would feel? If the husband would drag his wife all the time to an action movie, there would probably come a time where being a loser, or feeling that she has been a loser all the time and over the years, the issue may come up, and it may come up into a conflict, then can evolve into a serious confrontation as part of a broader issue between a husband, a spouse, and another. So conflicts can come in all forms and shapes, and we'll be discussing part of those. And negotiation is probably the most direct, the quickest, and the most effective way of resolving conflict or of reaching an agreement. Now, because we don't have much time, ideally, teaching negotiation as a matter of changing skills and changing behavior would require exercises, would require integrating thought. And I believe that in the very short time that we have together, I would try with you some of the introductory elements to an effective negotiation, and to better understanding the field, using getting to yes. And you have several sequels of getting to yes: getting together, getting past no. You can negotiate anything. And there's a lot that's been written, and I very much encourage you to start reading about this subject, because it's fascinating and it can help you in your everyday life. You do not necessarily need to learn those complex negotiations for the simple situations that I've mentioned, but they are critical, for instance, in the negotiation with Israel of Lebanon, negotiating its water borders. But I want you to know, and this is what the theory of negotiation pretends at doing, is that the very same principles that apply to the two spouses negotiation, when it gets complicated, when it gets complex, can have the very same, or more or less the same, problems and the same approaches as international negotiations or very complex legal negotiations. And the tools to analyze them and to resolve them and to use those techniques of negotiations are more or less basically the same principles. So if you know how to handle your friend or your wife, you could handle an international organization, or a different state, or even a different lawyer. So what I'd like us to do over the course of the 45 minutes that remains is that I will start with one typical exercise that we normally use in our seminars, in our training workshops or seminars. And again, the first learning point that I would like you to take away with you is that your best teacher is yourself. You are your best teacher because you'll have to gather pieces of wisdom from the various books, from the various seminars and workshops and courses, such as this one. But ultimately, these are mere tools for you to mix and match. Because everything that are in these books and many others, when I had to devise my seminar, my course on negotiations, I mashed them up. And with time, with my experience both in life, in law, and in politics, I have different perspectives, and you will have different perspectives. And I think the best tools are the ones that work for you. These are the good things. But the most essential part is that you must keep on learning. Keep on learning from your experience. In my seminars, I always ask the students to write a journal. That is, formalize your analysis. Every time that you go into a successful negotiation, you are so happy that you don't think about it. You don't rethink, why did I succeed? Or when you go into a failed negotiation, you also don't think about it, because the last thing you want to do is remember the problem, and you want just to forget about it. But a good learner is someone that with every single negotiation, as simple or as complex as it can be, is someone that can learn from the successes and from the failures. Because one can only learn from one's experience. How did I react? How did I communicate? How did I prepare? How did I deal with these issues? Can I do it better the next time? How can I evade those problems that I had? Or how can I replicate the successes that I had? So that's my second bit of takeaway. The first one is know that this is a field that has evolved, that has developed. My second bit is that you are your best teacher, and you must learn from experience. In our seminars, in our workshops, we go by exercises. And I'd like us to start with our first exercise. And that first exercise is a classical one that I use in the context of a negotiation. I want to show you a picture. And by a show of hands, you know that you have a tool that allows you to ask questions. You raise your hand. It's as if you're voting. I want you to look at the picture for a brief moment, and I'll ask you 3 questions. And I want you answers by yes or no to those questions. If this is all clear, then we will start. I will share the screen, and that's the first picture I want to show you. Do you see it? Rita?
Not yet, not yet.
That's not on screen. Okay.
No, we don't see it.
I think now you can see it.
Yeah.
Can you see it? Okay, good. Then please look at this picture.
I see a young woman.
No. Now I have to ask you questions. You answer by show of hands. Did you see a young woman? Who saw a young woman? Put your hand out. Put the hand out. And you have a click to ask questions.
Yes.
Who saw a young woman? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, second question. Who saw an old woman? 1, 2, 3, 4. Who saw something else, including both? Who saw something else, including both? 1, 2, 3. Okay, very good. So we are a group that is about split in 2/3. Half of you saw an old woman, the other half saw a young woman, and 3 of you saw both or something else, right? Now, my exercise, if we were in a normal setting, I would ask those that saw a young woman to sit together and discuss how did they see a young woman. I want someone to describe the young woman, please, to me. Who would like to describe what they saw in the old woman? Who wants to describe the young woman? Young woman. Please, I'm waiting. Do it quick.
Turning her head.
Yes, go ahead. Can you tell us why you saw a young woman?
What I'm remembering, the woman turned her head. I saw just her face from the profile.
Okay. Was she pretty? Was she ugly? Was
Pretty.
how pretty?
9 to 10.
9 to 10. Wow, you're almost ready for marriage. And was her head small, big?
Cute, small head.
And what was she wearing?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't see. I didn't see it.
Who agrees? What's your name?
Michelle.
Okay. Who does not agree with Michelle? Raise your hand. Who does not agree with Michelle? Raise your hand. Okay, Baria, can you please tell me and tell the group why you don't agree with Michelle, and please explain what you saw. You saw an old woman, right? Baria?
I also saw old woman.
But now it's Baria's turn. Baria's turn. Baria?
Hello, hello.
Yes.
The first thing I saw was the nose of a profile. The profile of, to me, it was a black and not so young, not very old, black woman. But then, split of a second after that, I saw a beast, like a lion or a tiger, with the mouth very much open, and the head, the head of this woman inside of it. But it was very quick.
Yeah, so you just saw a lion. I want somebody else that saw an old woman to respond to Michelle. Can somebody raise a hand? Not you, Rita, someone else. Can please somebody explain? Hello, who saw an old woman? I want to a show of hands. Yes, who is it? Hello.
I am just writing. I cannot speak. So I'm just writing and answering by sending like a message.
No, we
because
can hear you.
Where yes, but where I am, I cannot speak always because I have like other people around me and I'm the only one like following. So this is what I'm writing my answers.
No, I don't want written answers. I want spoken answers.
So for the old lady, actually, I saw the white hair, and the white hair gave me the impression of the old lady, though I saw also the young lady at the same time.
Okay. Now, as time is passing, I want to share with you the picture again. And where is it? Share screen. Okay, so that's the picture again. If you look at it closely, you would see that the old lady's nose is this big nose. Do you see the big nose? All of you, put your microphones. This is the big nose, and this is the cheek with the mouth. And she is putting a veil like an old woman will put a veil. And she is wearing fur like she is cold. And this is her black hair. Do you see the old lady?
Yes.
Do you see the old lady? Now, this is an exercise in what in English you'd use perception. This is the way that people look at reality. There is no absolute reality. There are always ways to look at reality in different angles. That's the purpose of the exercise. So this is a picture, this is a drawing that can be looked at both as an old lady with a big nose or a young lady with a small nose here, and she's looking away and she's wearing a veil, like a bridal veil, and she's wearing a necklace. That's the young lady with the necklace. So this exemplifies simple conflicts, because that simple conflict is about perception. So this is a different way to look at the same thing, and there is a different way to perceive that reality. And people tend to say that there is no truth. There are only perceptions of the truth. I don't want to get too philosophical, but that's true. Reality can be seen differently by different people. I can be trying to be nice to my girlfriend, but my girlfriend might look at my being nice as being condescending, and she may hate me for that. I once was opening the door for a lady in New York, and she bit me with her purse because she felt that I was an arrogant machist. So it gets complicated when you look at things from not only a different visual perspective, but also from a cultural perspective. If I was making way to a woman in New York, she felt insulted by my giving way to a woman in New York. But it gets all the more complex, this issue of perception, but it's still the easiest, because the way to end a dispute or a difference through a negotiation over an issue of perception is to allow the other person to better understand your perception. So, and you need to show, which is very difficult. In a drawing, you can show your perception. You can say with your hand, this is the nose. And the other would say, yes, but I thought that this small thing was the nose. And ultimately, both parties can agree that the settlement, that is the agreement, could be to understand, to both reach an understanding that this drawing can be seen in two ways. However, I have seen situations in many of these exercises where the negotiators will never accept. Never. Why? Because when they tend to discuss among themselves, it becomes a matter of power. It becomes a matter of principle. I saw an old lady, and when you visualize it too many times, it's very hard to change your perspective. Very hard. And if you ask yourselves the question, was it a young or an old lady? I remember there were situations in simulations that we had where it was always 1 out of 20 or 30 that would say, no, that's impossible. It cannot be other than what I saw. Because the issue in human relationships and in perceptions is that substantive issues, so issues about reality, becomes entangled, become mixed with personal issues, almost psychological or very personal issues about, that's how I want it. And if you were in a group and you're discussing the group, it becomes all the more difficult because the negotiating party is representing the group. And any change in a position will be considered as abandoning the group. So there is group pressure, and it's not always one person negotiating with another, but many times multiple people negotiating with each other, or one person representing another. And it gets all the more complicated when it's not only an issue of perception, so an issue of your perspective over reality, but when it becomes a dispute over interests. The real interests are problematic. I want more money. I want more power. I want more recognition. I want ownership of a land. I want responsibility for a position in my company. I want a raise. I want this lot of land. I want the first apartment and not the second. And you name it. If you go back to, in your experience of what causes conflicts and what requires agreement over disputes or differences, then it's your whole life. We spend our life negotiating our ways. Many times it works, many times it doesn't. And we don't have, in most cases, we don't have a drawing to show. We do not have proof of what reality is, what reality is not, and how our perception is. And the only way to do it is through communication, is through talking. And then it becomes extremely critical, the way that people talk to each other, and the way that people argue. And negotiation is not arguing, is not an argument. Winning a negotiation is not about quarreling, and it's very easy to go from a conversation to a quarrel and reach nowhere. So at this point in time, I want to introduce two additional concepts. After that, we have cleared those related to perception and the way that negotiation can evolve. And one, let's look at the different ways to find a solution to an issue or a problem. The most effective is negotiations, right? And if we had more time, but we're running out of time, negotiation is the quickest because it can be very quick, it can be very easy. Second, it is owned by the parties. And let's look at other means to resolving your issues, other resolving conflicts. What are those other means? If negotiation is that mean to reach a joint decision through communication, that's negotiation. Reaching a joint decision. So anything departing, anything different from a joint decision is not a negotiation. The most extreme case is adjudication. Adjudication is like a court deciding, right? So it's not a joint decision. It is in the situation where you have a failed negotiation and you take it up to court, you ask a judge to decide for you. And with the many problems that everybody knows. And if it's not the judge, then adjudication can have two types. You got adjudication of the court, or it can be adjudication in arbitration, which are a court or judges appointed by the parties. That's arbitration. And then you have another method, which is called mediation or conciliation, which is the intervention of a third party that helps the parties to negotiate. So we've got people that the negotiation that is assisted by a third party, that's a mediation or conciliation. And you have one mean of resolving conflicts, which we normally don't always think about it, and that's called evasion. That's doing nothing. In the case where in a group or a couple or friends, evasion is never challenging someone's decision. So you're always a loser in the context of win, lose. Evasion is considering that losing and not entering into a conflict, not entering the discussion is better. Why? One, you've got the value of time. So if you just want to finish with something quickly, you just want to argue it. Well, okay, I don't even want to negotiate. I don't even want to discuss. You do it your way, I'll follow you. That's one way of doing things. However, negotiation, joint decision-making has the value of owning the solution, whereas feeling always as a loser can cause problems in the longer run. The second thing is the element of time. Negotiation is quicker than any other process. The quickest is evasion. ما بعمل شيء. You decide. Negotiating takes little more time, but with much more time is mediation, and the most time is adjudication. You never end in a court, and you're not sure that you'll win. So that's the third element. Control of the parties of the solution is done through negotiation. You can still control the outcome, whereas you relinquish control when a third party intervenes. And you're not always sure that the mediation is going to be good, or that the court is going to give you whatever you're expecting. And therefore, ownership, time, cost is the least expensive. Courts, arbitration are very expensive. You pay lawyer costs, you pay fees, and probably the most important, I want to emphasize that, is the impact on the relationship. Negotiation and a jointly agreed solution reinforces the relationship, whereas any other means, including avoidance, and the worse, adjudication, and even mediation, can lead to irreparable damage to relationships. And it becomes much more expensive in terms of cost when you're talking about friends, spouses, family. But in people that don't know each other, relationship has no value. Two individuals discussing in a foreign country, and they don't have no interest in maintaining the relationship, that portion of the value is dropped from the equation of the negotiation. And therefore, the elements that I've talked about, we will refer to them as interests. The interest is what is it that you want to get out of a negotiation? What do you want? Ideally, you want to maintain the relationship if the relationship exists and is important. You want to have a substantive, acceptable outcome that is fair. So fairness is important because people hate unfairness. If I have the right to half a cup of Pepsi Cola, we used to discuss amongst ourselves, we're kids, and I think we all did that. And our mom used to give us one bottle of Pepsi Cola. And we used to quarrel because we're three boys, and we needed to have the exact amount of Pepsi Cola in each of our cups. So we used to pick the same cup, because if you take a larger cup, you'll have a different level of Pepsi Cola. How can you measure the Pepsi Cola if you have a mug that you don't see? So it had to be glass, it had to be the same exact type of glass, and we'd measure to the millimeter how much Pepsi Cola would put in our glasses. But how do you do that when you split a land? It's not the same thing. You don't have a glass. So you always need to refer to objective criteria. Objective criteria is measurement. And how do you measure a concept? There are measurements that are law, precedents, what people do in the market, what must be done. So fairness is very important. So the qualities of an arrangement are the ones. Put them in a list. Number one is fairness. It had to be fair. The second, it has to maintain the relationship, because sometimes you would agree to relinquish fairness to relationship, and it happens a lot. And this is what in negotiation we call trade-offs. So sometimes if you want something and I want to maintain a relationship with a friend, with a spouse, with a neighbor, with family, I can relinquish value for relationship. And I can relinquish relationship for value. And you have people that are prone to relationships and they value them much more than value, monetary value or fairness. So remember, fairness, relationship, time, cost, sustainability. Sustainability has to do with enforceability. Sometimes we can have an agreement and it's not enforceable. I can have a greater understanding about something that can never be enforced, or the enforcement of which would take years. So many times I would accept something because it's more likely to be applied, to be enforced. So these are the elements that form what I call interest-based negotiations. Focusing on those interests. The problem is that when you are faced in a situation that is very complex, because every situation at one point or another would have one element of those elements of interest. Time, fairness, relationships, cost, and so on. So with those various elements, it becomes pretty complex to handle. How do I value this and compare to the other? How am I going to handle them? And remember that in the processes that I mentioned, that is from evasion to negotiation to mediation, arbitration, adjudication, and coercion, the last one is I impose my will. You don't give me what I want, but I can kill you and I can take it or I can steal it. And that happens all the time in international relations. You disagree with me over land, I occupy your land and it's done. So you have a spectrum. Remember that you have a spectrum of processes that goes from coercion, forcing a solution. That's at the one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum, you have evasion. I just finished. You just take it. I don't want anything. And in the middle, you've got this beautiful, ideal, truly ideal situation of a successful negotiation. And therefore, how can you be a successful negotiator? Well, this is what the techniques, this is what those methods are going to teach you. Let me show you another slide that would show you the difference in styles of negotiations, because there are various styles that people can resort to. Do you see it? Hello?
Yes, yes, we see it.
Yes.
So if you look at this list, you see that it has 3 columns. Whenever you have to approach negotiation, you always have like 3 broad styles for your negotiation. You either play soft or you play hard. So if your style, if your psychology, the way you're brought and else, you can be a soft negotiator. If you're a soft negotiator, you go from the premise that participants are friends. The goal is agreement. But if you play hard, participants are adversary, the goal is victory. We are inviting you to change the game into what Roger Fisher and Getting to Yes called a principled negotiation. And the principled negotiations is one that considers that participants are problem solvers. They work together for solving a joint problem that is perceived differently or that have different value on different interests. So the goal is a wise outcome reached efficiently and amicably. For a soft negotiator, make concessions to cultivate the relationship. That's on the issue of relationship. Be soft on the people and the problem. And sometimes these people are trust. They like to trust, and they put so much effort into trusting each other. Whereas a hard negotiator is someone that demands concession all the time as a condition for the relationship. And negotiation become linked to relationship. I give you what you want. I give you a relationship if you give me what I want. They are hard on the problem and on the people, and they distrust each other. So the attitude distrust. So the solution, and that's what the method teaches you, is to separate people from the problem. It teaches you to be soft on the people, but hard on the problem. Don't mix and match things up. Don't mix relationship with substance, with the problem. And there are techniques to do that. There are tricks in the way that you talk. Second, the issue of interest and position. Remember that I told you that most of the time people have interest, but also most of the time they forget their interest to focus on the way to solve their interest. And there's a very classical story to illustrate that very simply. There were two girls quarreling over an orange, and their mother comes into the kitchen, and they agreed to cut the orange in half. That may look like a fair solution, right? However, the father comes later and asks the first girl, "Why do you want the orange for?" He said, "I wanted to make a cake. She needs the peel." And he asked the second, "Why do you want the orange for?" And she said, "I want to make orange juice." And instead of cutting the orange, he gives the peel to the first and he gives the pulp to the other, and they both have 100% of what they want, rather than half of what they want. So this is an illustration of how focusing not on positions, wanting the orange is a position. Cutting the orange is half is one way of getting what you think you want. But if you go beyond the position, so beyond the way you think you can resolve the problem, then you go to the real interest. So asking the question always to yourself and to the other, why? Why do you want this? Why are you being cruel? Why are you saying this to me? Why did you go to that person? And so on. Trying to understand, as in the original picture, getting the perspective of the other, so better understanding the reason for which a position is taken. Because the assumption is that if you understand why the position is being made, then you could develop multiple positions to meet the same interest. I will show you another chart. I doubt that you can see it. I'll show you now another small chart that illustrates what I'm talking about. Do you see it? Hello? Hello?
Yes, we can. Yes.
Okay, great. Now, look at this chart. It tells you that normally, look at the bottom. People normally go from problem to solutions, from left to right, left to right. So you say, and this happens when you're bargaining, for instance, to buy a rug. The seller would say, "I want $1,000. You say, "No, makhzou'a, it's old, it's not that, I'll pay 200. And then from 1,000 to go to down to 800, it go up to 400, and you may settle somewhere in the middle. So that's what sometimes you may be forced to do, but that's tactical positional bargaining. That's based on positions, and that would lead to splitting the orange in half rather than taking everything. So rather than going from a problem to solution, you need to make a circle, trying to analyze, and that's the importance of people analyzing the situation before getting into negotiations. As simple or as complex as it may be, preparing the negotiation is extremely important, and most people don't prepare for the negotiations. Simple negotiations require simple preparation. Complex negotiation would require extremely complex preparations. But in all situations, whether it's deciding on going to the movies or discussing the borders between Lebanon and Israel, you have to go through this circle. It's understanding the problem for you and for the other party. Remember the drawing on perception. If you don't understand the other party's problems, you'll not be able to help that other party go beyond its being the prisoner of a position that is taken. Remember the picture of the old lady and the young lady getting better understanding of facts, of perceptions, of the problem, what you dislike, what the others disliked, and then you diagnose the problem, you go up in theory. So what generally is the issue? Is it a general issue of recognition? If we are currently discussing who writes a chapter or who takes something, is what is asked, and sometimes that's a problem with children, is the child crying or shouting because he or she is looking for attention? Or does he really want something? What's really the problem in theory? So if you identify, for instance, that the issue is recognition, then what are theoretical solutions for the issue of recognition? What other ways can provide that person, what different approaches and strategies that can provide that person with recognition? And going back to actionable ideas, what are the various actions that I can propose? So rather than coming up with one concept that is splitting the orange in two and taking two parts of an orange, then if you understand the reason why one wants an orange, then probably one of the sisters will take the peel and the other will take the pulp. Now, going back to my list of styles of negotiations, we were talking about principled negotiation, which is very important. That is, separate people from the problem, focus on interest, not position. I tell you, it's very complicated. Doesn't always work. And then you get to invent options for mutual gain rather than having only one limited option from your perspective and then quarreling over who takes what. And lastly, but not leastly, insist on using objective criteria. Develop multiple options to choose from and relate your options on objective criteria that can be law, that can be things that I've done in the past, that can be experience, or otherwise. Now, these are the four basic pillars of the so-called principled negotiation, as opposed to the positional bargaining of parties. However, it can become extremely much more complex when you go into it. And let me go back now to the various phases of the negotiation. We spoke a lot about the preparation of negotiation. And I told you that you need to learn from your experience, which is very important. But there's a chunk that is critical in the negotiation that is not only what you can analyze before, after, and you can think conceptually, but the communication itself. And many times, the challenge of negotiations is good communication. Good communication would essentially means being in a meeting and, for instance, not losing your temper. Second, being able to observe yourself as if you're watching yourself on the television. And what we do in our seminars is, in many cases, we do, in our workshops, we do simulations and we film people negotiating. Because it's important that you train yourself as if you leave your body and you watch yourself negotiating. That's very important. Very important that you observe yourself while doing. And that's extremely critical for becoming a good communicator and becoming a good negotiator, because that would allow you to control yourself. That's a tool for control. You don't lose your temper if you can decide when to be ham'ana, when to raise your voice and when to lower it. When you lose control over your emotions, you just lose the communication, because communication also has to do with listening. Listening more than speaking. You have 2 ears, 1 mouth. Most of the times, people keep on talking all the time. That's what I'm doing now. But I don't have a way to pass on many information with very little time. But that's very ineffective communication, because the most effective communication is 2 ways communication. For instance, if I'm talking for whatever I'm talking about, I should have stopped and asked for your feedback, ask questions, and that 2-way communication would make sure that whatever I'm saying is better understood, better interiorized, and better used eventually. So making sure that there's 2-way communication is important, but doesn't happen all the time. And I think if you look back at the way you do it, you've got people that are silent all the time, or most of the time, or talk all the time, and explaining. And negotiating is not necessarily defending all the time your position. It's creating that exchange of perceptions, that checking of facts, and that's leading the other person as a partner into a solution. And that's why it has to do with a lot of preparation and a lot of leadership through communication. Mastering communication is an art on and by itself. And there are workshops and books, and you've got hundreds of material on and about communication. And communication in the context of a conflict is very difficult, because you always have to learn how not only to control yourself, but to control the other. If the other becomes emotional and becomes violent, and how do you control that? And there are techniques and ways that one can learn, and they're very difficult. But I think the most important takeaway from that part of our session is make sure that you master the techniques of communication, read about it, experience it, and most importantly, don't lose your temper, and observe yourself and learn from observing yourself as if you were separate from your own body. That's how you would be able to learn from experience. And whether it be on preparing the negotiations abstractly, and also preparing for the communication. Now, even in the communication, in terms of negotiation, there are techniques, there are ways to do it. You should always start with a warm-up. You don't go into a meeting, especially in Lebanon, with our culture, and just immediately talk about issues. And it's not accepted. But sometimes it takes too long. And you've got the type of أهلا كيفك الحمد لله على السلامة طمني إن شاء الله الكورونا ما ضربكم بالعائلة منيح طمني عن الست والأولاد. And sometimes it can go on and on and on. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's always good, whether you know the person or not, you need to establish a good working relationship. And it's like testing the waters, testing the styles, testing the grounds, the way that you can talk on very simple social issues. That's a warm-up. It's like Rita does sports. Rita used to drill us before we get into the hard stuff. Rita would drill us into warm-ups. There always is a warm-up for negotiation. And a good negotiator is someone that would be able to test the grounds through the warm-ups and would create relationship whenever these relationships don't exist. Second phase is going into an agenda, and you have in mind an agenda. And normally you have multiple issues to discuss. My experience is that you should always start with an easy thing. You start with the easiest, because resolving an easy subject would put the parties into a good mood. And then you could alternatively go to the hardest and then to a middle. And if you have multiple issues, then you can ultimately have to decide on a package. And whenever you have a package deal, these are the most difficult. And remember, package deals are not only with objects, with money, or with substantive issues, but it is trade-offs between interest, time, cost, relationships, fairness, effectiveness of the solution. And effectiveness of the solution could be the level of details that I can reach. I may have an agreement in very detailed format, everything that is written down or agreed. And sometimes I can have a very sloppy agreement because I'm not certain and it was tough. So we can have an agreement, but it's sloppy. It's not clear, and it can create later more problems that would have solved. But that might be a necessary step or interim step to go further into resolving the conflict or the issue that you have at hand. And let me go back on another subject, that is, how much can you resolve problems? Sometimes you cannot. Sometimes you cannot. Or sometimes you cannot reach an agreement. So a good negotiator would be someone that would develop something which Roger Fisher calls a BATNA. Does anybody know what a BATNA is? Anybody? A BATNA is BATNA, your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So before going into a negotiation, you must always know when you have to walk out. And the way to know when you walk out is to know what is your best alternative, because sometimes you do not have a best alternative. If your best alternative is dying, and if you want to die as a hero, this might be a BATNA. However, if death is not an option, then keeping your life is a limit, or keeping a house is a limit, or keeping a flat, or keeping a relationship. And you need to develop your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And sometimes your best alternative is going to court or going to a mediator. But the BATNA needs to be prepared. For instance, if you know you're going into a tough negotiation, before going there, you need a safety net. And that safety net could be preparing someone to enter in the worst case scenario as a mediator, to enter and help the parties get back to the table or improve their negotiation. So remember that, and the solution could be a good solution in the sense that it could be final, enforceable, and all the causes of the problems are resolved, and this is called conflict resolution. Or it can be relatively temporary, sloppy, and that's called conflict settlement. Or you maintain the problem, but you manage the worst of its negative impact, and it's called conflict management. Or nothing happens, and you're into conflict, continuous conflict. So I hope that I want to stop now and take a few questions probably, but I cannot squeeze more information than I did in an hour, and I think our time is out. Now is the time for Zeina. But I hope that this introduction would have given you the taste of reading more, of Googling the subject a little more, of better understanding the issues and how they can be mixed and matched. And remember, you are your best teacher. And I'm very happy to have spent this hour together. Rita, you tell me if we have a few minutes for Q&A or we stop it here.
I think Zeina is with us, so if she, I think then it's 9:05. I don't think there is time. I would have loved.
ريتا أنا أبداً ما عندي مشكل. Please.
Okay,
لا.
Then let's do it. Let's do the Q&A.
No, yeah, I don't want to take more of Zena's time because I'm also
No,
will be.
Zena is
will be-
okay. She just said
Okay,
she's okay with it.
so let's take
And
a
in
few.
case there are questions, Akid, please go ahead. Akid.
Yeah.
Let's have a few Q&As and we will end it afterwards. Who will moderate? Please raise your hands and open your microphones. Yes, Michelle.
I just have one question. Once you said that we need to separate problems from persons, but if the problems came from persons, how can we separate it?
Well, that's a very good question. Then, if the issue is relationship, then you have to focus on resolving the relationship issue. But you would very quickly realize, and I would all invite you to look at a book called "I'm Okay, You're Okay" by Eric Burns. It's a book on transactional analysis, which is analysis of transactional relationships. It's a book on psychology. When you have a pure issue of relationship, then it's either purely psychological, and you still have to apply the very same principles. You have to understand, why do we have the problem? Assume you have a problem with your girlfriend, with a friend or spouse or family member. You need to understand why. And sometimes relationship problems cover up other issues. And you need, in your analysis, to really understand the why. So the real reason behind the problem. Otherwise, you cannot solve the problem. So a relationship problem has to be analyzed as you'd analyze the problem between Lebanon and Israel over water. The very exact need of analysis, except that psychology is much more complex, and the relationships probably are the most complex, subject to negotiate. And the dialogue, the conversation, that is the actual negotiation, is the most charged with emotions, relationships. Whereas if you're discussing over a contract and even on issues of land and water, it is less emotionally charged than relationships. And relationships probably are the most difficult to negotiate. Any other question?
Thank you.
I wanted to ask the same question that the gentleman asked about separating people from the problem.
Yes.
But I got some of my answers. What I would like you to elaborate a little bit, if we have time, about the idea of in any negotiations, there is always one party that would want more than fairness. Like you said, the first rule, the most important is the fairness, and you gave the example of the cups and the Pepsi Cola. But whenever there is a process, a negotiations, it means there's a problem. It means there is one party that is trying to get more than its rights. It's what this party has.
Yes.
There's always this situation. So what is the best way to approach negotiations when you know that the person facing the other party is here to negotiate to get what he doesn't have the right to?
Look, take the worst case example, that is the issue on Palestine between the Palestinians and the Israelis.
Yes.
It's a situation of occupation. We've seen that in Lebanon. So the only way sometimes for fairness is never to accept and to put your conditions. So fairness could be a breaker. However, if there is a potential solution, even in the Arab-Israeli conflict, and I can take it down to much simpler level. If you have multiple interests, Like you have an interest in relationship and an interest in land, and a third interest in resolving your conflict effectively without expenses, you can then make trade-offs. There are techniques through which you can trade off, have a quick solution for less money or more money, but time would be valued. And I think that Brahim Hanna, and I'm very happy to see your picture, Brahim, if you're with us. He's our expert in calculating the values on intangibles. How do you value time? How do you value relationships? How do you value land, and so on? So when you trade off the package, there's a package deal, and that's easy. And again, as I said, whenever you go into analyzing your negotiation, analyzing your situation, you need to assess your BATNA. Your BATNA is your breaking point. At what point would you not accept the terms? And being a principled negotiator does not mean being a weak or a bad negotiator, because doing a bad deal does not necessarily make you a happy person. So doing a fair deal might lead you into shifting in time. So, for instance, you can submit a lawsuit or an arbitration and then go back to negotiation. You would have improved your outcome and so on. So negotiations could be put into a continuum of processes, into a context, and it has to be looked at from that complex analytical grid that I offered you to use, rather than a one issue subject matter like relationship or fairness. So it's much more complex than this. Yes, Rita.
I have to stop, Ghassan. Sorry, but we have to start with Zena. That was a fantastic session. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Thank you, Rita, for bringing back very old memories. I'm very happy to have offered you this session.
Thank you.
And it gave me a heck nostalgia, hopefully, to go back teaching this. And thanks again, and I look forward to your continuation, Rita. Every good luck for you in whatever you're doing. And
thank you. You're staying with us for Zena.
Yes.
And everyone else can stay. Of course, you can take part in the. I want to introduce Zena Dakash. She has filmed a talk, a 20-minute talk that I sent the link to everyone. It's called Doing Time, and it's about prisoners that she worked with in the prison in Rumi in Lebanon. First, let me stop to make a difference between the two sessions. To stop the